You know, I'm honestly surprised they didn't have a no capes joke in this episode. Hello, Interwebs. I hope you're all doing well, and I'm here to review the latest episode of She-Hulk Attorney at Law, Episode 5, Mean Green and Straightforward into These Jeans, which I have to say is actually an excellent title. Though, honestly, that is probably the funniest joke that I got out of this entire episode, sadly. There's a lot that I liked about this episode conceptually. I think there's a lot of stuff going on structurally and for She-Hulk as a character that I actually really liked. And there's a couple choices with how they depict the law in this episode that I also enjoyed. But I think the biggest failing for me of the entire episode is I just didn't really find a lot of it funny. And I think part of that is just the culture and like the things that it's looking into. I don't particularly vibe with trying to find sneakers. Like I know there's a whole subculture of people that really get into like sneaker hunting and getting to know all that stuff. But for me, it's just not really my thing. Same thing with like the makeup world and like that sort of fashion presenter stuff. I almost got a job once, funny story, at working at a makeup company. And the one thing that I despised, because I got so close to being hired there, was that I had to learn so much about makeup brands and stuff. And like, I do enjoy doing makeup, but like, that world is just very not what I care about. And no insult to anybody who does. It's just not what I like. And so I think a lot of the jokes that were building off of that in this episode didn't really work for me all that much. And so I just didn't find myself connecting with them. And I ultimately didn't find them to be incredibly funny. There are a few ones here and there that I kind of giggled at, and it mostly comes down to delivery. Like the moment where Jennifer runs into the guy that she dated last episode at the law firm, and she just like rolls over, and the two characters have that like exchange really quickly right afterwards. Like, you rolled over really quick. Yeah, real quick. I laughed at that, or at least got a chuckle out of it. And again, I think that just comes down to Tatiana Maslany's like excellent delivery. Like, she is always bringing her A game, and I'm always enjoying her if I'm not always enjoying the entire episode as a whole. So yeah, just generally the humor, it didn't really work for me. And the other thing that kind of bugged me with this episode, and I promise I will get to positives because there are some positive things that I did enjoy here, but staying on the negative for just a minute, I didn't really like the lack of fourth wall breaking this episode. Like last episode, I really, which I think is the best episode of the show so far, really liked the balance that they had with the fourth wall breaks. Like, it seemed to be jokes that fit the medium that we were in. Like, she was aware that the people on Twitter were going to be ranting at her and like ranting about a woman in the MCU and all that jazz. Like, those jokes fit this show and like really felt like it was smartly like self-aware. And then this episode, there's literally like, I think one quick gag at the end of the episode where she winks at the camera and is like, oh yeah, my suit. And that's literally the only fourth wall break we get. And I'm not saying like every episode needs to have a fourth wall gag a minute, but I feel like that like lack of consistency with the amount of fourth wall gags we're getting just really throws me off and ultimately questions like, why does it need here to be here in the first place? But then on the flip side, it's some of the best jokes that they've had so far, so I kind of want more of it. So it's a kind of a weird balance with that I am really kind of finding frustrating as I watch the episodes week to week, especially after last week really nailed it. Last negative that I'll hit on here is the Titania joke with her being like a fashion beauty presenter was fairly one note for me. Like, haha, yes, she's a shallow beauty figure. And the fact that they've been building up her character a lot, not only just in the show, but in like marketing and Twitter and stuff like that, I found to be somewhat disappointing that this is kind of the ultimate joke that we're going to get with her. I hope that they are able to, if they bring her back and she's not just going to be in this one episode, that there's ultimately more to her and give her a little bit more depth as a character than what we've seen. Because I think you could do something interesting with that type of character. I mean, look at the character that Jamil Jamil played in The Good Place, which it kind of had a similar vibe to this character here, but had a lot of depth once you got to know her over the course of that show. So I was kind of disappointed in that element of things, especially since she's been built up. Now, let me talk about a few positives, though, that I did really enjoy about this episode. Structurally, I think it's a really smart idea that she's been a character, Jennifer, who has not really fully accepted the She-Hulk moniker yet. Like, she kind of been pushing back against it. She reluctantly accepted it a few episodes ago. So having a story where she literally legally has to, like, accept the name She-Hulk and fight to hold on to the name She-Hulk. And in order to choose to do that, it's not just like a legal battle that she's drawn into and forced into. It's one that she actually chooses to engage in because it bothers her that she is doesn't have the ownership of the name She-Hulk. That, I think, really worked for me because it actually was like her coming to accept who she is in terms of this element of her life that she's been trying to push away ever since the first episode for the most part. And I thought that that was just a really smart way to not only bring her character through that arc, but do it in a way that tied into her legal skills and things like that. The second thing, too, is they actually used the law well here. Now, I am not a lawyer. My dad's a lawyer, and I know a decent chunk about the law in terms of just, like, osmosis from him. But I'm sure there's, like, a bunch of procedures and stuff that definitely were not accurate in this episode. But in just a surface level pass, this episode did actually feel like it was using the law correctly and that there was actually good law being done. Like, they had to follow copyright law. They had to, like, prove that she had been using it beforehand and that this person, Titania, had, like, sort of copyrighted it to build off of her goodwill. And they actually had to make legal arguments. I think that that was, like, a really great way to actually use the law here, because last episode they played very lackadaisical, and I think even before that too, even with the abomination bits too, were fairly lackadaisical with the law. And I found that to be kind of disappointing, because not that I need the show to be like to the letter, like exactly what we think law actually is in the real world, but like part of the fun of this type of story is like applying legal stuff to superheroics. So if you're going to play like willy-nilly with the law in the show, it ultimately kind of ruins the fun of like having to think legally about what it would be like to live in a superhero world. And so I think that this episode actually doing that, I think really worked. Sadly, it was still a bit mundane, but I think that it was ultimately kind of interesting, at least in that aspect of it. It also did really like that she had to like parade the guys in front of her, because then it was, again, it kind of embarrassed her and showed that like she could do better than what she's getting. And that'd be an interesting sort of arc for her character. Though one thing that I do find mildly bothersome with that is like, it does bug me that this show, and again, we have had other female-led superhero shows, so it's not always this, but it does bug me that like the women-centered show, the one that's like really steeped in like women's culture, like specifically feminine like culture, like that's kind of the vibe that this show is like, hey, it's the feminist one, which we can talk about the girl bossiness of Disney and Marvel aside. But, like, that's the one that gets focused on, like, you're gonna go dating. Oh, look, she needs to get the boy. I don't know. Again, it's one of those, like, maybe I'm overreading into it, because there have been other Marvel women-led projects. But it's one that's like, I'm kind of down on that being the arc for her. But that she's, like, needs to find some form of validation from a guy sort of thing. I don't know. Hopefully that's not the way they'll end up going. Like, maybe she'll get it beyond that. Find a guy that fits her, that doesn't necessarily justify, like, validate her, in terms of, like, needing her sense of self-worth coming from that. But that's one thing that did kind of bug me with it. One last thing too, we do have this storyline with the costumer guy, which ultimately felt like a lazy riff on The Incredibles. It's like, it's interesting to see that we would get a costume designer in the MCU. It kind of makes sense that there would be one, and we've seen that not only in The Incredibles, but something like Invincible. There is a prominent costume designer in that show / comic book as well. But this didn't really add much to what The Incredibles already did. In fact, Edna Mode in The Incredibles is already fantastic. And so if you're going to do something similar to that, you kind of need to add to it. And all they really kind of did was a lazy kind of like, had homosexually like coded like fashionista guy. And it's like, oh, okay, we'll do the gay coding mean guy sort of thing, which is like, huh? I've seen that trope a billion times. You're not really adding much to it. It does lead us to get a nice little cool Daredevil like foreshadow at the end there. It's like, ooh, I was excited about that, because I am very much excited to see Daredevil back. But because we know he's coming in the next few episodes. But ultimately, the joke was kind of like, yeah, okay, you're gonna do the gay stereotype. Woo, fun for me, I I think that's everything that I had to say on the episode. It was fine. I didn't hate it, but it ultimately was just like, yeah, it was okay. But that saddens me because like last episode, I was really high on the show. I was like, oh, if this is what it is, I am in for this because it's like not the best show of all time, but it's fun little MCU junk food. I'll have my MCU like ice cream junk food every week with She-Hulk and having fun with it. But this one just kind of brought it down for me, and I'm like, yeah, not really feeling it. So that's kind of where I'm at with this episode of She-Hulk, but I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. Were you up much more up on this one? I'd love to hear your thoughts. So let me know, and I hope you're all taking care of yourselves, and I hope you all, my friends, live long and prosper.